Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is the second episode of Mad Money, and today we are here to discuss the swap case of Metro do Porto. But first, please give a massive round of applause to our well-known guests, Jeremy Grantham, Michael Steinhardt, Katie Wood, and Warren Buffett. So, today we are having a different episode where the questions to our guests will be made by the audience. Yes, you heard it correctly. You will be the ones asking the questions to our four beloved guests. But first, let me just introduce you the case. Before 2007, Tribunal de Contas warned Metro de Porto that the company had been incurring inane financial costs by having a fixed rate of 4.75%, which led Banco Santander Tota to present two solutions for that through an interest rate swap. But then you ask, what is an interest rate swap? Well, basically and very briefly, this consists of an exchange of interest rates between two parties, where normally one party has a fixed rate and the other one a variable one based on a benchmark interest rate. But moving on with the case. The first proposal that Santander presented, and the one that was chosen, consisted of a payment by Metro de Porto to Santander of a 1.75% fixed rate for the first 2 years, and then for the third year and forward, that fixed rate added by a spread indexed to the 3 months Euribor. This spread was calculated based on the following formula.
Good evening, everyone. Jim, that seems a complex formula. Can you explain it with some more detail?
Of course. For any 3 months Euribor value between 2% and 6%, the actual spread will be the maximum value between 0 and the difference between the previous spread and 0.5%, and so it wouldn't be any problem. However, things become more complicated when the Euribor 3 months exceeds the minimum value of 2% or the maximum value of 6%. When that happens, not only DG coupon is equal to 0, and therefore the company doesn't have that reduction on the spread to pay, but also the actual spread becomes higher than the previous one by twice the difference between the barrier and the Euribor 3 months set in advance. This snowball effect actually led to extremely high financial costs for the company. Now, dear audience, I hope you understood the case and feel free to ask any questions. Anyone? Well, let's make a 15 seconds break for you to think a little, and we will be back in a moment.
Did you know, in case of an accident, 8 out of 10 people die when they're not wearing a helmet?
Be like João, wear your helmet and drive home safe. Go to foresighthelmets.com and order yours.
Well, we are back and hopefully with more questions. Does anyone want to go first?
Good evening, Andrew and dear investors. Actually, the television advertisement made me think about the risk, in this case about the finance and not elements, of course. Do you believe that swap was really designed to reduce the risk, or was it just speculative transaction?
It is a really interesting question, and I also ask it myself times when I'm facing interest rate swaps. As Gina explained before, Metro do Porto did two swap agreements between 2002 and 2006, one with Banco Comercial Português, another with Banco Santander Tota. The first agreement with Banco Comercial Português fixed the interest rate at 4.76%. It was certainly considered high for the economic environment at that moment. However, I personally believe that the main objective of that agreement was to reduce the risk, since Metro do Porto reduced its exposure to fluctuations in interest rates. In contrast, the second agreement with Banco Santander Tota increased Metro do Porto exposure to fluctuations in interest rates. Therefore, it is difficult to argue that the main objective of this swap was to reduce the risk. It was useful to reduce the financial costs with the loan, at least for a short period of time, but increase the firm's exposure to the market's volatility. Another reason that makes this swap a strange way to reduce the risk is its snowball effect. Clauses that can provoke that type of effect should be seen as a warning signal and should be analyzed carefully. I think that Metro do Porto did not realize which were the consequences of that decision if the market change has occurred. So, for me, it is clear that this second swap had speculative purposes to reduce Metro do Porto financial responsibilities. In a simple way, we can look into it as a bet between two parts, Metro do Porto and Banco Santander Tota, which would serve the interests of each one if different market situations were verified. I think there are no innocents in this type of agreement. The management team of Metro do Porto want to serve its interests, although fail to see if the company could bear the risks if the worst scenario happens.
Good night. I also have a question. Do you think it's possible to compute Metro do Porto's net cash flow in order to see more objectively the impact it had on the company?
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for your question. Before I show you Metro do Porto's net cash flow, we need to understand what caused this snowball effect. Firstly, as you can see, Banco Santander's payment rate was composed only by a 2.35% fixed rate, semi-annually, while Metro do Porto's payment rate was composed by a 0.88% fixed rate and a variable component based on spread. This variable component was the main responsible for this snowball effect, as we can see from this graph. After 2.5 years of it being constant and equal to zero, it skyrocketed, reaching values such as 10.71% in just after 3 years and 35.43% in December of 2015. Here we have a more objective look of what happened. As we can see, Banco Santander's payments were constant and equal to 2.09 million euros. Metro do Porto's payments were also constant, while the spread was equal to zero. And as we can see from the table, from June 2010 onwards, Metro do Porto's net cash flow turned negative, reaching values such as negative 30.22 million euros in December of 2015.
Good evening to you all. By looking at the net cash flows that Michael previously showed, it makes me wonder about what could motivate companies and bankers to enter such contracts. Could any of you enlighten me?
Good evening, everyone. I think I'm able to answer clearly to your question. Starting by analyzing companies' point of view, interest rate swaps help managing companies' floating rate debt liabilities by simultaneously allowing them to pay fixed rates and receiving a floating payment. The opposite can also apply, meaning pay floating and receiving a fixed rate in order to match their assets and liabilities. Interest swap rate also gives companies flexibility once separating borrower's funding source from the interest risk rates, allows to secure funding according to its needs, and to design a swap structure to meet its specific goals. Lastly, the swap usually leads to the lowest rate due to coupling a floating rate loan with a swap. Moreover, companies' managers may also find interest rate swaps helpful to reduce the risk associated with drops in interest rates by switching variable rate interest income to a fixed rate income stream. This typically happens because the other party is more interested in increasing profit, and so is willing to take an added risk by swapping a fixed rate interest for a variable one. As results, both parties benefit by better matching financial positions to the company's needs. Regarding now a banker's point of view, offering the rate swap gives the bank flexibility by providing another tool to manage its interest rate risk and enables also prepayment discipline. Such contract also offers an economic benefit. Once executing a swap will generate non-interest income to the bank, and this fee income will be thus recognized in the period the swap is executed. Lastly, by separating a loan's funding from the management of interest rate risk through derivatives, interest rate swaps provide pricing flexibility and consequently allows the bank to gain competitive advantages.
Good night. Thank you all for your presence. My question is, are there any methods to reduce the risk of derivatives mishaps in companies?
That's a very good question. So, despite all the advantage that derivatives can bring to the companies, there are some mishaps that can happen but can be reduced. A big motive for these problems are the wrong forecasts in a moment of negotiating a derivative. For example, an interest rate swap that my colleagues talked about. I will give some advices in order to help companies. The first thing is to fully understand the product traded and be aware of the detailed conditions. Risk must be quantified and a limit must be set for it. That risk limit should not be exceeded, even when it results in a profits increase. Derivative investment should be something done for the company as a whole, not giving much independence for a specific company trader that helps to detect potential failures. I reinforce that companies should be very careful speculating based on future forecasts, paying attention if the forecast is well done and has good assumptions. Wrong forecasts can lead to wrong decisions and create situations of big losses. Finally, I will give you 2 specific strategies to help reduce derivative mishaps. First, the reduction of bilateral credit risk. It refers to the possibility of one side of a trading counterparty going into default and failing to complete a swap payment. To reduce the possibility of this happening, some institutions require a central counterparty to clear the swaps. It stands between the 2 sides of the trading system and guarantees the performance of the transaction, making sure that all sides can meet their obligations. In that way, if someone fails to complete the transaction, the central counterparty steps in and completes the needed payment. Second, the inclusion of margin requirements, which are used in the case of, for example, the swap value decreases. It will be required to add more money to ensure that there is enough capital. When those losses occur, the players of a trade have the margin that can absorb the losses. I hope I could help, Jim. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all for your questions. We would love to answer them all, but unfortunately, we don't have the time for it. Thank you, Jeremy, Michael, Katie, and Warren. As you know, it's always a pleasure to have you here. Also, thanks for those of you at home that are watching us, and good evening, everyone. We will be back for our last episode next week. See you then.